So thank you for joining us here today, Peter. I know obviously we had a few technical difficulties, so it took a bit longer than we needed to. But thank you for being episode number 1, and hopefully starting something that will last quite a while. So basically, just what I want to say to you is basically just the first rundown of what this show will be. We've kind of decided we speak to as many different people as we can. From basically as many different kind of walks of life as I can find, and just kind of speak to, say, you at 16 when you first started working, or if you've started working earlier than that, what was it you wanted to do as a job looking ahead at that age, and then where did you actually end up, and if you changed your mind as you grew, as you changed your mindset, as you changed your disciplines, what avenues and roads did you go down? Did you actually think, you know what, I'm not really into that? And what roles then progressed further, and where you ended up today, really?
Right. No, thanks, Luke. Delighted to do this, and slightly intimidated by the fact that I'm the first one. But it could be good, it could be bad. But looking forward to it.
So basically, where did you start then at 16? Was it 16 when you got your job, or did you start before that?
I think I was working at 16 certainly, but just part time because I was at school. So I stayed at school until I was 18 and did A levels. So it's going back a long time, but I went to school in Kent, in Canterbury, and I went to a grammar school. So goodness knows how, but I passed my 11 plus, so it enabled me to go to grammar school, and that was I think really significant for me. I was fortunate enough to go to a really good secondary school, which I think opened my eyes to different people and different opportunities. I mean, like a lot of people, I guess, the thing that drove me to get my first job was wanting some money.
Some money to spend.
Exactly right. And I apart from kind of a paper round, and I did a few of those, I think the first kind of weekend job was working in offices, cleaning telephones of all things. Where back in those days, no mobiles, static telephones, great big calculators that size of a big printer, really, in those times. But I used to clean the phones, eventually elevated to cleaning the whole office as well. And
got promoted in the job.
Exactly. And then over the next couple of years, before I left school, I did lots of different things. I worked in the summer as a tractor driver, on the basis of being able to drive a car. I can now say that driving a car doesn't qualify you for driving a tractor, because I managed to crash the tractor into one of the apple pickers' cars. But less said about that, the better. Worked as a barman in a hotel and a porter, and I worked in Charlton Paper Mill, which is where my dad worked, and so I had a job in the holidays there as well. So lots of different things, principally to earn money. But as I look back on those jobs, actually they were of really good value, because I encountered a work environment, lots of different types of work environment, and most importantly, I had interactions with people working, and working for all sorts of different reasons, different times in their sort of careers. And of course, when you later go on to a career, it's those very same people that you need to work with. And if you aspire to any kind of position of responsibility, then you'd be looking to sort of work with them and hopefully influence them to get collective positive results in something. So actually, those jobs, although small beer really, were highly
essential,
valuable. I
value and
thought.
highly value and essential for what you wanted at that age. Would you say then, like in school,
Exactly.
if you went back to the grammar school, was you like a hard-working kid, or was you kind of one that just you knew you had to be there and just kind of not coasted your way through it? Because I think for me personally, I think especially. I think so much me in like secondary school, I knew it was just you had to finish secondary school, get through sixth form, then go to uni. It just was the next kind of step, the next rung on the ladder, so to speak. But how was you? Was you like very, academic and head down, do what you needed to do, or?
Not academic. So I mean, I really probably fair to say, I did what I needed to do, but I did not set the world alight at all academically. I think my interests, sport, loved rugby, played a lot of that, and discovering pubs, discovering girls, and I think after all of those things, actually doing academic work was probably came next in order of priority.
There were a few distractions along the way, was there?
Absolutely. Most people in my school went to university. Not that was the norm then, because a lot more people go to university now than did when I was finishing school, which was the kind of late 70s. I didn't want to go to university. I just about scraped sufficient A levels to be able to get into university, but I actually wanted to join the army, and I just felt I wasn't ready at that time of life for more study, and I wanted to see a bit of the world and do something a bit active. So that's what I ended up doing.
So did you go then from say you finished at 18? I'm guessing, you finished your college at So then did you go straight into the army? Did you take a bit of a break to just kind of work out where you wanted to go, or did you go, okay, this is the army, this is the next step, it looks interesting, off we go?
Pretty much straight in, really. I mean, I don't come from a military family, but I did. Friend of the family was in the army, and was I suppose quite influential. You get some people that influence you at different times of your life, and I had a lot of respect for him and his kind of approach and attitude to life, and so a combination of that and what I had picked up about the military meant that I think in the summer when I did A levels, I was down the recruiting office saying what's this all about then. I fancy joining, and so I wanted to join. I did want to join as an officer, and that meant being sort of sponsored by a regiment to back me, which for me was the then Queen's Regiment, which was the local infantry regiment. Got to know them. They said they'd take me, but they wanted me to do some sort of basic training as a soldier first, because I had no military experience, and so I joined as a private soldier. Went to something called Infantry Junior Leaders Battalion, did a potential officer course, and then fortunately, passed that and went off to Royal Military Academy Sandhurst to learn how to be an officer.
How was that then? Like, I mean, I don't have, well, I don't have any military experience at all, but, you know, obviously I can only speak to, I see, you know, you see it in movies and TV, you know, Forrest Gump when he goes and gets shouted at for 2 weeks. How was it for you? Was it kind of, do you get hit with that immediately, or is that just for like, that's just cinema and over exaggerating what actually happened?
It was quite a shock to the system, I have to say. Yeah, I mean, you know, I suppose you have some idea of what you're going into, but yeah, the first few weeks, you know, at Sandhurst, yeah, there's a lot of being shouted at. There's a lot of running around, being expected to do a lot of things with too little time. And I guess, you know, the idea of that is that it's intentional. It's supposed to instill in you, you know, the need to comply and conform with instructions and that kind of stuff. And it binds you together with the other people that you're with, because you know, you're all subjected to the same thing. Yeah, you know, managed to get through it, and then, you know, got commissioned, as it's called, as a young officer into not into the infantry. I was commissioned into raw signals, so I went into communications, which in those days was largely sort of pre-data. There wasn't a lot of data around. There was a lot of analog. There's a lot to do with radios and those kinds of things. And but yeah, had a very good career in the army, which lasted, you know, almost 20 years in different parts of the world, doing different things. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, so like, when, I know, going back to what you said earlier about, like, you know, not being the most academic student out there and having a few distractions along the way, would you say that time when you first joined, was it setting the discipline, getting it kind of instilled into you, would you say that was very, like, important to you to then move on to the other stuff you've done later in life? Would you say what they teach you there, and, like, you know, although you didn't expect it when you first got there, and you know, I'm guessing that it was a bit of a shock to the system immediately, but you fall into it, you learn your place, you learn what to do, you know, the camaraderie between you all. Would you say that is something that, because I spoke to quite a few people, and they say like that, although it's not essential for the everyday person to go into, the people that do go into it, it sets a discipline, and it sets rules for them that they carry then on through, even once they've left. It's still there in them. It's still like instilled in them.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly. I think, you know, for most people, I think if they've done, you know, some sort of military service, it does leave a kind of indelible mark. I mean, you know, why is that? I think, you know, there's something about it being at times quite an intense experience. So, you know, I mentioned, you know, when you first do, you know, basic training, then you're pushed, and I guess whenever you are pushed, you have to draw on bits of yourself that you don't need to draw on day to day. And so it makes a bit of an imprint on you, you know, in terms of your memory, and you hopefully learn something, you know, along the way. And I think that, you know, that's recurrent throughout your working life. I think you know, as a young officer, I mean, I still was more interested in, you know, having a good time, and you know, getting as much, you know, out of life day to day, rather than thinking about the long term future, until probably I don't know, as a young captain. when suddenly you have to do promotion exams, so you're back into that sort of environment again, and you have the possibility of being selected for staff college to go on to a higher rank and those sorts of things, which requires a certain amount of application. So again, I think that to be honest with you, that's probably the first time where academically I really felt I started to kind of engage, because I kind of needed to, and drew some benefit from that. Went off to staff college. Eventually went back there and taught there towards the end of my career in the military as well. So I think whatever it is, it doesn't have to be military, but if you can do something that doesn't just mean that you kind of drift, something that's challenging. I think that the good thing about that is that you get the potential to push yourself and develop. And in a way, it doesn't matter whether you succeed or fail. It's just that you've pushed the envelope a little bit and taken on board a bit more experience.
It sets a goal for you to then go and achieve, doesn't it? Rather than having too much of nothing, isn't it? Once you have an unlimited thing and go, okay, this is the goal, this is what I want to do short term. You can kind of set your sights on that, and I guess it's easier then to know what you're doing, doesn't it? So how long was you at that staff college for then, and what was you kind of having to learn there?
So the way the way the staff college is sort of structured, it's now a joint services staff college. It was the Army Staff College at the time. So there's got a mid-career course when you're a kind of a junior captain, which is really focused on sort of operations and tactics. So it's all around sort of war fighting basically, but instead of just knowing about your particular regiment or part of the army, you start to learn about other bits of the army and how they all fit together, essentially. So a bit more complexity. And then later on, to get into what's called the Advanced Command and Staff course, which is pretty selective. That just pushes the envelope a bit further, and in terms of scope of operation, you start to learn about combined operations, so working with air and naval forces and international collaborations and those sorts of things, and a bit about defence policy, how the Ministry of Defence works, that sort of thing. So that course is sort of master's level, year-long residential course, which probably did I don't know, I must have done, I think it was 94 I was there.
Yeah. So what you're talking about, going international and learning everything else, did you do like time abroad? Did you go other places, or was you just mostly based in this country then?
No, quite a bit of time overseas, and I did get seconded sort of back to the infantry as well. With I was very lucky. I had 5 years serving with the Brigade of Gurkhas.
Wow.
So in the Far East, Hong Kong, Brunei, places like that, and then the other thing that took up quite a lot of my time was with signals, working in the kind of Arctic warfare role. So time in northern Norway and each year, and working on the southern and northern flanks of NATO, basically as part of something called the Allied Command Europe mobile force. So it was sort of joint force combined with with representation from all the different NATO countries, and the idea was that we'd be able to deploy rapidly, and we'd exercise that quite often in case there was and then Soviet incursion into NATO. So we had a lot of the skills that becoming more and more relevant now with Sweden just having joined NATO, and people starting to think about quite a long border in the Arctic Circle and those sorts of things. So it's interesting to see how these things ebb and flow.
I mean, what was it like working with the Gurkhas? I mean, notoriously they are quite a, solid bunch. I mean, do you have any interesting stories working with them?
It was an absolute, privilege to work with the brigade. So I volunteered for Gurkha service and went to Hong Kong. Had a couple of years with Queen's Gurkha Signals, and I've always been into mountaineering, something I was interested in from being at school, really. So I took, Gurkhas on expeditions, went down to New Zealand and climbed Mount Cook in the Southern Alps, and did, expeditions inevitably in Nepal as well, and the Himalayas. I did a year in Kathmandu, which was fascinating. And a very interesting year because we had some very bad monsoon floods in Nepal that year, and the Nepali government asked us and the Americans for some help because they'd had several bridges washed away. So we kind of cobbled together. We found some bridging in various parts of the world and hired the biggest aircraft in the world, and got some Gurkha engineers from Hong Kong to come into Nepal and put the key bridges in to get communications back into the Kathmandu Valley and those sorts of things. But I mean, Gurkhas, you probably you may be aware. I mean, they come from a very long tradition of working with the British Army that goes back to 1815. The whole Gurkha ethos comes from a group of people, sort of military caste, from the hills in Kathmandu. They're tough, they're resilient, and extremely loyal, and quick thinking as well. An absolute joy to work with. Great sense of humour as well.
I mean, just going back to that point. I mean, coming from where you started out in a local village, whatever, and then going there. I know this is probably going to sound a really stupid, random question, but is there any kind of similarities that you do see within that, like almost like a small town of people, and then you just go completely to the other side of the world, and yet there's still that sense of community with the people that you're working with, even though you've never met, you come from completely different cultures, and yet there's still that sense of community that you build together. Is that still like a strong element? Because obviously you're going on about the bridges collapsing. You then had to all pull together to do that. Do you think that's important? Also, kind of thing, like, because I've been going, not a rabbit hole, but I've been going off on one recently, with going and kind of focusing on, kind of the whole idea of like community and building kind of better relationships with people, especially now during the whole social media, whatever, where there are these more relationships, but they're not really stronger relationships. They're a lot more surface level. Whereas something like that, where you're there, it's literally boots on the ground. You're building this with people from, like I say, all over the world. How ingrained is that, and how strong is that to continue like building relationships with those sorts of people, and with people that you're not around very often?
Well, I think you've touched on something which I think is really important, and probably goes back to those kind of early experiences I mentioned in terms of part-time jobs and getting into a kind of work environment. Ultimately, whatever you end up doing, the chances are it's going to involve working with people, and being able to see their perspective, understand them. And if you're responsible for any sort of team, then you need to kind of create an environment whereby everybody can give of their best. And that, I'm a great believer in the kind of power of the collective. And as the years have gone by, and into second career after the military and things, I've come to realise that unless you can, I think the kind of a leading, managing role is kind of painting a picture for people, but really it's about what the future looks like. But most importantly, it's about kind of motivating and enabling them to to work out what they want, how they're going to kind of contribute to that framework, and that means connecting with people, on quite a personal level, really. It's all about the people.
Do you think you've got better at that since you've left and gone on to different careers, or do you think you've always kind of had that ability to kind of see people, not for who they are, but you can kind of see what they really want to say and where they want to take things, and you can go, okay, this works with you, but you can do this in a good way, but this doesn't work best. Would you say you're good at doing that, or that just come with experience?
I don't know if I'm good at it. I've got better at it, maybe. I think that when I left the military and I moved into education, my last job, as I mentioned, in the army, I was teaching at the Joint Services Command and Staff College, and teaching officers that were kind of mid-career. And I was thinking about what to do as a second career. I knew that after almost 20 years in the military, I just wanted to do something else. I figured there must be other things in life. The experience of teaching, I sort of joined the dots. I thought about, various mountaineering expeditions, and I'd led things while I was in the army. And I thought, I think the thing that really excites me is enabling people and helping people develop as individuals. So at the time, this was Blair government was fairly new at the time, Labour government, and it was education, big investment, drive to push up number of people able to go to university, things like that. And so my kind of big plan was try and take some of the kind of leadership management stuff that I picked up in the military, translate that into a management, kind of environment in education, because that's what really excites me. And so that's what I did. I did an MBA with the Open University to give me, I guess, some of the technical skills and perspectives, but it certainly required kind of relearning, readjustment, moving into a civilian environment, because you in the military you are united by a pretty common culture. I mean, a lot, all individuals, but there are certain things that kind of bind you together. You don't necessarily get outside the military, and you have to understand that. And again, I think redouble efforts to see things from different people's
Yeah,
points
because
of
we were on
view.
about this before we started, wasn't we? We were saying like obviously we've like looked you up and done a bit of prior research before we started, like, but we're looking at your kind of career path and how you'd done that time in the military, and then from an outsider's perspective looking in, it almost looks as if you like had a complete career change.
180 rather.
Yeah, 180 complete career
Yeah.
change and going, right, now it's time to teach. But by the sounds of it, it was something that it wasn't an immediate change, or that you built upon what you've learned, and it kind of influenced then your choice to go into, once you stepped foot back in the outside world, you then went to go and teach, but it wasn't something that you just thought, right, I'm going to go and teach, I'm done with this now. It was introduced and influenced before you left the army, if I'm correct.
Yeah, definitely. I think different times in your life, I think it's quite exciting. You take stock, and for me, leaving the kind of security blanket of the army, I could have stayed in and gone through to retirement and all those sorts of things, but I felt I wanted to do other things. Bit scary, but quite invigorating and exciting to do that kind of self-reflection and say, well, what skills have I got? What that might be helpful in civilian life, and what do I really want to do? So you go through that kind of self-examination. So yeah, it was kind of very, very deliberate to go into education. And initially, I didn't go into higher education. My first kind of job was working for a new organisation called Learning Skills Council, and that was for funding all post-16 education other than universities. So I worked a lot with colleges, school sixth forms, that sort of things in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and really only got into higher education as a result of having helped with a turnaround of a college that was on my patch and was struggling financially, and then somebody saying to me, do you want to come and have a chat about doing that sort of thing in the university environment? So yeah, so that's how I come. And then so this was probably about 2002, and then ever since I've done quite a lot in different higher education institutions. I mean, which bizarrely, 3 or 4 years ago, I ended up. I found myself actually running, a very prestigious drama school. As an interim basis. So I did it just for a year in between them. It's the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Arts, but between Lambda recruiting, a serious kind of theatre person. So I held the reins. But and during that time, we had a reunion of my staff college course. It was 25 years since we were all at staff college together, and so we all went back to Camberley and the staff college building and had a very nice dinner and things. But yeah, I was the only person that was running a drama school at the time from all my former military colleagues, I have to say.
Well, that's something you can hold on to then and say you can brag about to the others, isn't it? Then you can say,
exactly.
I've done this.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, how is that like running that? Because I imagine that's quite like an administrative role, isn't it? And you've got a lot of elements, you've got a lot of puzzle pieces that all fit together that have all got to work perfectly or work seamlessly to keep it moving forward, to keep it all going correct. Yeah. How was that going? Like, how did that go? Do you think you did okay with that? Was that difficult to run? Was it a lot to take on at first, or was you all right? With it?
Again, it was a kind of progression. So by that time, I had worked with quite a few senior teams in some large universities and some smaller ones. So I was I've been pretty close to the person in the hot seat, and you start to see recurrent scenarios and issues, and so you develop a bit of a toolkit in terms of how to address them. The thing that really interests me is change. So I've moved around quite a lot because I've been largely an interim manager. So I've specifically gone to institutions to help them with a particular issue. But yeah, Lambda was the first time that I'd been it, the person, kind of the accountable officer and responsible to a board of trustees. And yeah, very busy, particularly when you throw in, things like COVID start to come along. But again, I think it is a progression. And again, it's all about, creating that environment. Even though, I was leading the institution, there's no way I'm going to, tell those very good teachers who are well versed in the theatre, how to do their job. What I need to do is to make sure that they're properly supported to be able to do their job well, and that means attending to the administration and making sure that the finances work and the building operates and those sorts of things. And it's I would say the thing to remember, and I've observed this in lots of different institutions I've worked in over the years, that academic colleagues are. It's always good to bear in mind that if they're in a teaching role, then quite often the kind of primary allegiance is to their subject area, and they're very passionate about what they do and what they teach, understandably. And you just need to bear that in mind, I think, when you're trying to get them to operate within, this construct called a university or a faculty or department.
I mean, you touched on it lightly, just, but you were saying you was there through the transition through COVID and things. Then would you kind of at the reins during then, by the sound of it?
What happened was I handed over to the person who took over the permanent role, Sarah Frankham. She arrived in I think the December, so she'd just really taken over, and then COVID hit, I think, end of February 2020, something like that. So I was still around, and I was asked to stay around as something called executive director. So really running the business side of the operation to free her up to do the creative stuff and drive forward the artistic vision for the school. So yeah, a lot of the dealing with COVID. I was heavily involved in that. Very interesting period because we were. There was the. Just the operations of teaching drama does not take well to being done through Zoom, and it was Zoom then, and not many people had used it or knew what it was or was very keen on using it. So changing the timetable, training staff, making sure the technology worked, all those sorts of operational things. But at the same time, we needed to lobby to try and get the point across to politicians that there are different challenges for different subject areas, and it was important to get a drama school back, particularly a small drama school. You're not dealing with big numbers of students, to get back to face-to-face learning, as early as possible. And we did that, and we lobbied, and I think by and large we were quite successful in that. We drama schools, film schools, and a few others, did did come back to face-to-face teaching much earlier than the rest of the sector.
Yes, well, I know it's been mentioned before. I mean, and people say it quite often, but I mean, in any school or university to have to adapt to that changes is going to be an immense job anyway. But I imagine to try and do drama and film school through the medium of Zoom and Microsoft Teams, I guess that was a difficult thing to. Well, for both students and, we know, don't we, from a student perspective, from students and a lecturer's perspective, to just get your head around and function, for it to function correctly and for it to all go well. I mean, was that introduced like quite quickly, or was that, how is the mindset, is what I'm trying to get at, how is the mindset for like someone in your position compared to like ours, where obviously we're all going, oh, we don't know what to expect. We're just receiving the information that comes down to us. Oh, we're on Zoom this week. Oh, we're in person this week. Oh no, we're not in person. We're back on Zoom. And that's from our perspective, where we're both on Zoom. We're not on Zoom. We're going in. We're not going in. Everything's kind of, nobody really knows how it's all happening. We all get through it in the end, but nobody really knows where it's going. But how does it work from, say, your perspective, where you make the decisions, you get this say of going, okay, right, so we know we're going on Zoom now, we're doing this, we have to do this to not only stick to kind of like government regulations, but to kind of just to make sure everybody is doing their job to the best ability. How do you define and have that last say to go, okay, this is what's happening? Is it through speaking to everybody around you? I'm guessing, you surround yourself with people that are knowledgeable in their fields, but how is it for you to say, okay, this is what's happening, this is what we've got to do?
But also, actually, on that as well, did that time with your time at the military, did you transfer those sort of authoritative skills over during that period?
I think to take the latter point, I think what the military does is equips you to deal with the changing scenario, changing situation. So and the military instills it gives you a kind of toolkit to whatever has happened, to be able to kind of objectively make an appraisal, and in however little time is available, identify the options, select the best options against some identified criteria, and make a decision. And and making a decision and communicating it clearly, of course, is really important. So yes, there's probably a bit of that, having hopefully clarity of thought as to when do you need to decide by, to give people long enough to go away, set up the technical systems, change the lesson plans, learn to use the technology, those sorts of things. But again, it goes back to working with people and trying to give people and students, including students, some agency in it, and some voice. And I'm sure, we didn't do that perfectly. And, at times where we've had some real pushback from students about what we've done. But certainly that's what we kind of tried to do. And I remember very well, when the pandemic first started, just getting the whole management team in a big room, around a kind of square table, and just brainstorming it, saying, well, where does this go? And we closed the school. We sent all the students home, got everybody in a big room, stepped through it as to, is this going to go away quickly? How long could we be closed for? Fortunately, one of the things I'd been doing just beforehand was kind of strengthening the IT of the institution. So we had a good kind of technology partner that we were working with, and we had some good infrastructure. The challenges were more about, convincing students and staff that we could operate in some way in this medium. Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty good though. But the thing is that with sort of the reliance on technology, I mean, since the pandemic, I'm sure we've all sort of got back to a new sort of normal. But, from your point of view, do young people depend more on technology now? I mean, we've got AI, we've got literally every sort of social media thing under the sun. From your perspective, where you obviously enjoy developing people, do you feel technology gets in the way of that, or did it enhance it whilst you guys were on Zoom?
Well, I mean, yeah, we're taking this. We're not kind of self-criticizing ourselves, but on a positive note, we're speaking to you through Zoom.
Yeah.
But then, how does it work in a positive and also negative note? Then, isn't it really?
Yeah. It was interesting actually. I was on a webinar just last week, which was run by the QAA, the Quality Assurance Agency, who are there to really check on standards in universities. And the webinar was all about the impact of AI and how assessment should be done. Because to be blunt, it's bad enough just with plagiarism and things like Turnitin can kind of help in that regard, but with something as dynamic as Chat GPT and things, and it's a whole new ball game and a whole new world. I think the colleagues that were on that webinar, I think the general acceptance that clearly the technology is not going to go away. It's not, so it is something that needs to be kind of embraced in some way. It's kind of a cultural issue, I think, in that in an academic scenario, in that you guys have to, I think, know that ultimately too much reliance on that stuff is not going to help long term. And I think that's right. I mean, particularly you're investing a lot of money in your education. You want it to be as effective as possible. I think what we need to do in terms of AI is, use it, but be completely transparent about when we're using it. And if we can do that, and be clear about when we're using it and when we're not, hopefully it can be positive, and it can certainly, allow time to focus on the really, really important things. And the same with, operating in this way. There are times, I think, when you do need to get kind of face to face. But certainly cutting down travel time, throws up a lot of time for other things. So,
yeah, I mean, I've been grappling with the idea for a little bit, because I mean, you can look at university students and you look at you like Chat GPT and AI systems like that. You can literally just say, oh, here's an essay question, basically write it for me. I mean, it is that. At this point, it is that simple, isn't it? And that's only what ChatGPT 3, and the next one coming out is ChatGPT 4. And I guess I'd like to get your opinion on this. I mean, for me, I guess inevitably, at the end of the day, really, it just really comes down to the discipline of the individual to go, okay, this is the easy route for me to personally take, but it doesn't really get you. It gets you to the finish line, but it doesn't get. It's like running a marathon, but it's someone else doing it on a bike. You know what I mean? You still got to see it and get to the finish line, but you're not putting in a lot of the work. And I guess how is it just discipline, do you think, that you will be on our shoulders at the end of the day, and when everything's been released, is it just us that we've got to, from your perspective, is it just kind of the discipline that we have to do ourselves, or is that it?
I mean, I'm sure that universities will and are thinking about technological kind of safeguards and precautions that can be, so a more kind of advanced version of kind of Turnitin and that kind of anti-plagiarism technology. Somebody asked the question, can you ask ChatGPT whether this essay has been written by a real person or not? And you can ask them, but apparently you'll get a different answer on a different day, because the whole thing is developing. And but I'm sure there'd be an element of that. I mean, there's other ways, aren't there? I think there's something about the amount of academic face-to-face resource. I think universities might need to kind of think about that. I think the more the lower the numbers of teachers as a compared with students, the less opportunity there is to get to know the individual student, so that you can kind of triangulate this remarkable essay that has just appeared with their kind of a performance, in the classroom or in seminars. So perhaps something like kind of more of a 360, bit of a triangulation, really might help as well. But I think there's always a way to cheat, right? But I just encourage people to really think about where do you want to be in 20, 30 years time? Do you want to be looking back and saying, oh, I've still managed to kind of pull the wool over people's eyes and get away with it? Or do you want to look back and say, yeah, I did that with hard effort. I deep process things, and actually I've got the confidence that I know my stuff.
I mean, yeah, because it's a very difficult thing to do. Because have you seen that article recently that's come out about the man that had he had a dog and he took it to the vets and he couldn't. The vets were saying we don't know what's wrong with the dog. It's it's not feeling, it's not very well. And we just assume the inevitable is going to happen. And he got the bloods back from the dog's like X-rays and the bloods and everything, and he put the results into ChatGPT 4, so the new one that isn't released yet, and they told him what was wrong with the dog. Like they told him that I think there was, I can't remember what it was.
It's like an infection or whatever.
Yeah, it's some infection or something wrong, and then they just followed up the next question by saying, okay, this is a problem. What's the solution? And it then told him, get this medication you've got to get it from this place, this place. I mean, from your perspective and seeing all the work that you've put in, and I mean, even like the work we've got to put in to get where we're going, when it's laughable at the moment that we can sit here and go, oh yeah, well, look at that. He's using it to fix his dog and everything else. But where do you see it kind of heading and being like, when you can literally just get everything you want at your fingertips? How do you kind of stay motivated? Like if you're doing a medical degree at the moment and you've read that,
yeah, that's pretty unsettling.
Yeah, where's your headspace at? And I guess from your teaching perspective and your role in universities across the years, what would you say to them, and to kind of be like, okay, you've got to keep going? What would you say to that?
I mean, it's very hard, and it feels like it's a really significant period in human history, isn't it? I think your example of the dog kind of illustrates, I mean, we're talking about it because it illustrates the exception rather than the rule. I mean, the fact is, very few people at the moment, in terms of worldwide population, have access and the wherewithal to be able to apply productively, what ChatGPT can do. But I guess that is going to change very, very quickly. I do still hold the hope that there's a place for human intervention and creativity. I mean, my most recent appointment, I was at the London Film School, which is a film conservatoire which produces really some work which is sort of internationally recognized, graduate films that are very good, very moving, and it is. I may be proved wrong, but it is hard to see how the kind of originality and the depth of human connection that some of that work creates could be created by machine learning. I don't know, and in academia, again, I think hopefully we've all got examples of good teachers, and the good teacher. It's not just a question of what they tell you, but it's how they listen and how they kind of interact and what they know about you, not because it's been pulled down off a data sheet, but because they have a day-to-day human interaction with you, and that's how they can be so effective. And I don't see the machine is ever going to get to that level of perception. So it may be overly optimistic, but I'd like to think that there is still a role, but particularly in higher education. Yeah.
I mean, not to extrapolate on that idea, but then do you think kind of with having all this answers at your disposal, do you think then it will kind of change the education system, where instead of doing things that you I mean, obviously through secondary school you've got to do your maths, you've got to do English, whatever. Yeah. But do you think having it all at your disposal then kind of changes the reality of it, where then people go, okay, I'm now just going to kind of focus on elements and roles and jobs that I want to do rather than have to do, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, I think, I mean, hopefully that's the case now. I mean, hopefully, you guys are following the path that you're following because it's something you want to do. But is it a way of, it comes back to time and focus. Is it a way of ensuring that you can really focus in the areas where you can add value? And I guess,
I mean, well, yeah, going back to that, it's the idea of discipline again, isn't it, really? It's the idea of, I want to do this, so I will do what I can to be able to do this, regardless of everything else that's going on around. And I think it then brings back to the whole idea of almost like personal sovereignty, where it's you got to put yourself, or not first, but you've got to be like, okay, I'm doing this because I want to do this and I want to learn this. To do it that way, I think.
Having that kind of agency. And I think, self-included here, it's very easy to kind of drift and just accept. But I think it does us all good to kind of challenge ourselves, and every now and again have a bit of a regroup, think about what comes next, and and why, and say, is that what I really want to? Is that what I really want to do? And I suppose this technology that we've been talking about has has changed the landscape, or it is changing the landscape. So it's going to throw up maybe new career opportunities, which are to do with how you fuse some of that easily accessible knowledge to create new things.
I think, have you got any more questions?
No, I mean, I guess the last thing to ask is, what's next for you? I mean, you've pretty much, done so much. I mean, you've done as much work as I think most people, would have done in 2-3 lifetimes, let alone one. So what's next for yourself? Anything you've got planned?
That's very kind. I think I just keep on bluffing away as you and I hope that the next. I mean, I'm still in the kind of interim business, so looking for the next kind of role, whether it's institutional leadership role or helping achieve some kind of change initiative, because I enjoy it really. I like the educational sphere. I think working with young people keeps me young. It's challenging, and and that's good. So I'm up for the next thing really. But one other thing occurred to me. When I was at school, I guess my first experience, I did work experience, and for a brief period, I did think about going into journalism. So I remember I did work experience for a magazine in Dean Street in Soho.
Wow. Okay.
And the magazine was called Data Link, which sounds now like a dating app, but it was actually an early kind of computer magazine, and I had to gather together some articles based on different press releases, and I think holograms were big at the time. But so in a different world, I might have ended up trying to do something as a journalist. But I have to say that it's very attractive, the field that you guys are thinking about, and I think the technology that we've just been talking about, and the whole fake news thing, means that we're more in need now than ever, I think, of good journalistic and ethical minds to provide our window into the world. So good on you, and I wish you well with your future careers.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, I could sit here and speak about things all day, but we've all got things to do. So thank you again for coming on, and maybe if we're still here next year, or we reach episode 100, you can come back and speak to us again then and see where we were all at that point then.
Brilliant.
All right then. Thank you again. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Good luck with it. Okay.